Right, are we gathered? Has everybody got coffee or coffee or tea? Good morning, everyone, and it's a huge pleasure to be here this morning. Oh, should I be using this mic? Maybe. Can you hear me? Or does it matter? Switch on. Switch on.
We can hear you okay.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this launch of this new campaign to build a local democracy in Scotland. In a sense, it's a campaign whose roots go back a long way, but at the same time, it could hardly be more relevant to the moment that we're in now, with so many challenges facing government at every level, and the weakness of the local level of government throughout the UK, and particularly here in Scotland, becoming more and more apparent as a sort of vital element of our whole structure of government. We used to say back in the 1990s, we were campaigning for a Scottish Parliament, that local government is really the basic building block of democracy. And I do believe that. I think if people begin to lose faith in the ability of their own local communities to make decisions and to look to the future together in a sort of purposeful, collective way, then in a sense, their whole faith in democracy becomes more fragile and more dominated by the kind of manipulations of which we've only seen more manipulations of public opinion in the 25 years since the Scottish Parliament was launched. Vanessa Robertson here and I were sitting on the consultative steering group back in 1998 to 99, which was putting together the sort of structure and the sort of detailed plans for the new Scottish Parliament after the referendum had agreed that it should come into existence. Local government was often very much in the front of our minds, and we saw the process of devolution to Scotland as one that would only thrive if it also involved a strong element of re-empowerment of local government, which had already been seriously weakened during the Thatcher period, and reform of local government. And as we all know, in the years since 1999, no Scottish government of any colour has actually taken on the task of doing that reform, of reforming the way local government is financed, of enhancing its powers, and of making sure that it's truly local. So hence this campaign, which is launched today, and I'd like to thank you all very much for being interested in it and for being here this morning. And without much more ado from me, I'm Joyce McMillan, by the way. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, but writer for The Scotsman and long-time campaigner for devolution and for democracy at every level. And without any more from me, I'm going to start introducing you to our terrific panel who we have here today. I did have the order in which they were going to speak. And the first is going to be, indeed, Esther, my former colleague from those days on the consultative steering group. Esther's a tremendously useful and well-known figure in Scottish public life. She's done various things like chairing the Fife Health Board and all sorts of other senior jobs. But today Esther is going to be talking to you in her role as a former member of the CSG about why she has become involved in and is so committed to this campaign. So welcome, Esther. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joyce. My name's Esther Robertson, as Joyce says, and I was involved in the campaign for a Scottish Parliament from the time of the 1979 referendum in a variety of ways. And it's probably, and my husband's at the back, he will confirm this, the highlight of my life when in 1994 I was appointed as the coordinator of the Scottish Constitutional Convention. I'd been in the Assembly Hall when the convention was set up and when Kenyon Wright made his famous speech, and it had always been my dream. So when they finally advertised for a coordinator and I got the job, I was over the moon. It's one of the biggest privileges of my life to think I played a part in securing the Parliament in 1999. And as Joyce says, we were two of the group that were drafted into the CSG to draft the standing orders. I had cause to reflect on today's date and why it had seemed significant. And it's because on this day in 1997, we had just resumed campaigning for that referendum after the death and funeral of Princess Diana. And activity in Scotland was feverish as we'd 4 days left to win the vote. And I had the dubious honour of having to go to London and wasn't here at all, because I was sitting in a BBC studio with the Donald Finlay QC as he was then, from the Think Twice campaign. And my job was to represent the convention and the campaign on a radio and television phone-in. I mentioned this morning, it seemed a bit odd to me if the BBC 2 and Radio 4 producers actually made a programme about Scotland, but there you go. That was my last public outing, because when we launched this scheme in 1995, I spent the next 2 years running what was called the Preparing for Change programme. And a part of that programme was touring the country, making presentations with a wee slideshow about how the Parliament would work. Everything from the numbers, the voting system, the funding, the powers, and all of these different aspects to explain to anybody who came along how the Parliament was going to be established and how it would work. One of the most common questions, if not the most common question at every one of those sessions, whether it was 3 folk at the Thurso Chamber of Commerce or 200 in the EICC here in Edinburgh, was won't this Parliament just suck powers up from local councils? I haven't decided whether I was naive or what I was, but with complete confidence I said absolutely not. Here in this document it says the Convention has committed that the Parliament will not allow devolution to stop in Edinburgh. Powers will then be devolved out to local councils and local communities. And it says, secure and maintain a strong and effective system of local government. Little did I know that over 25 years, exactly the opposite would happen. Having promised nobody would suck powers up, successive governments, and it's not a party political issue, it's true of all of them, have drawn powers to the centre. And as Joyce says, I believe now more than ever, those local powers are absolutely critical. Some of the things that are helping address the biggest challenges are being done by local communities, by development trusts, by all sorts of people, without the powers or the resources to do them the way they would if they had a local council. So I, for one, when we saw the 25th anniversary coming, thought now is the time we have to revisit this issue. And a group of us, an unusual collection, I think Ewan described us as, got together and decided to launch this campaign. So obviously we don't have to ask you in this room because you're here, but we would love it if you would spread the word. There's documents on your chairs, there's more copies if anybody needs one, but please visit the website, sign the declaration, buildlocal.scot, all the information in the magazine on your chairs. I'll be happy to take questions, but I'll stop there and hand over to our minister.
Thank you, thanks. Just want to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure.
Explain your involvement.
My involvement. Yep. Right, I'm Dave Watson. I'm currently the director of the Jimmy Reid Foundation, the Scottish think tank and the publisher of Scottish Left Review. I was formerly the head of policy and public affairs at University of Scotland before my semi-retirement in 2018. So I'm here because I think most of us would agree that Scottish Parliament has brought democracy much closer to Scotland, but it hasn't created the promised local democracy for our local communities, as Esther rightly pointed out. Instead, we still have some of the largest basic council units in the world, and our public services have been centralised. Now, despite several initiatives, or many initiatives between COSLA and the Scottish Government, and you can read some of them on the briefing on the website, several commissions and numerous reports, we're no closer to reaching the goal of subsidiarity. In practice, powers have been stripped from councils, and services such as police, fire, further education and water have been centralised. 3/4 of public spending is directed by Scottish ministers, including £23 billion spent by unelected quangos. Now, I've been involved over many years in most of those initiatives, but I point you to the Commission on Strengthening Local Democracy in 2014 as a good starting point, and David McNeill, the chair of that commission, I'm pleased to sign the declaration and is here today. I was also an expert advisor to the Christie Commission, which recommended that the first object of reform should be to ensure that our public services are built around people and communities. The Jimmy Reid Foundation, which I'm proud to be the director of, has published many reports on this issue. In Building Stronger Communities in 2020, we argued that the starting point of subsidiarity, building integrated public services from the bottom up, but sharing where appropriate. The role of central government, we argued in that paper, should be to set the strategic direction of policy based on outcomes, rather than trying to direct services from Edinburgh. In the paper published last week, we highlight it's not just about democracy. We published a paper called Building the Local Economy, and there we highlight the impact on the economy of centralising services and a weak local democracy. The two go hand in hand. However, a country the size of Scotland can't justify duplication and difference just for the sake of it. Therefore, in many of the papers, we've argued that we need public service frameworks that allow local services to focus on what matters, even where decentralisation is not viable, and it may not be in some cases. The bodies concerned should still be required to collaborate locally. Now, it sometimes feels that the only discussion around local government comes from those advocating directly elected mayors or provosts, or even have a bitter Twitter squabble over whether there should be mayors or provosts. These top-down initiatives, I would argue, have not produced a strong sense of local empowerment. Instead, they centralise power in a single individual, which could lead to unaccountable and even authoritarian leadership. As a former trade union official, I understand that there will be trade union and workforce concerns over creating a larger number of councils, along with cost concerns more broadly about duplication. Now, this is where the national frameworks I mentioned are so essential. Local decision making should be focused on what's important to communities. We don't need hundreds of, 100 plus in fact at the moment, different procedures, terms and conditions, contract documents, etc. Neither do we need a bureaucratic infrastructure of senior managers. This is an opportunity to explore the concept of a single public service worker on standard terms and conditions and joint introductory training, both of which were envisaged by the Christie Commission. In an era dominated by austerity economics, local services have continued under all administrations to face the brunt of budget cuts. Successive administrations have ducked the reform of local government finance, despite credible proposals in both the Burt report and the later Commission on Tax Reform. Council tax accounts for less than 20% of council expenditure. It used to be over 50% in Scotland. And equivalent councils in Europe, it's between 50 and 60%. Unsurprisingly, local election turnout is significantly higher in countries with greater devolved taxation. So smaller councils on the European model also enable local people to engage with local democracy. There have been many initiatives to improve citizen engagement and participatory practice in Scotland, but they've largely failed to engage working people. Not at least because they haven't put real power in the hands of recognisable communities. So I view the declaration, which I'd urge you to sign, as a starting point for a new conversation about genuine local democracy in Scotland and how we deliver public services. We must put right the forgotten aim of devolution to disperse power not just from Westminster to Holyrood, but onward to communities. A comprehensive plan for reform built up from communities, not imposed from the centre. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I just say from sort of the chair, I'm only loosely chairing this very powerful bunch of people, but thank you very much for reminding us of the contribution to the whole evolution of democracy in Scotland of Campbell Christie, who was such a huge major figure in the events of the 1990s and whom we still, I think, miss so much as a voice in Civic Scotland. He was really a tremendous force for that, General Secretary of the STUC at the time. And our next speaker is Willie Sullivan of the Electoral Reform Society in Scotland.
Thanks, Joyce. I'm called Senior Director for the Electoral Reform Society, and I work across the whole of the UK, but have responsibility for Scotland. And I'm telling you that because Leslie suggested that I tell you a bit about me before I tell you what I think. I grew up in Fife. My father was a miner, and 40 years on from the strike, I've been kind of reflecting about, I was probably 14, 15 during the strike, reflecting on what that was about, you know, and it was, and how this relates to this. And the miners were fighting for community. I feel more and more, the more I think about that. And not long after that, I left school and worked as a gardener in the local park. I was an apprentice gardener in the Glen, Pincreeve Park, so we call it Glen in Dunfermline, in Dunfermline District Council. Got promoted when I moved to Kirkcaldy District Council as a landscape officer. And I joined the trade union. I think it was a regional officer at one time, and then through union education, really, became a policy officer in the new Fife Council through the Big Bang reorganisation that we had in the 90s, and then went on to work for the Labour Party and stuff, and came back to Fife as a councillor. So I've been involved in local government quite a lot over my life before I ended up in a think tank world. And I think it's really important, as people have said, and I also think this campaign is a kind of fusion of two of the best pieces of work that I think have ever been done in Scottish public life, and that's the Christie Commission work, which spoke about how you invest upstream, you invest in our communities and public services to save you costs downstream. It truly is about investment. And then the commission, the COSLA Commission on local governments, and great that David's here, because I think that was, again, equally one of the most important pieces of work in Scottish public life. And we've seen little advancement on both of them, I'm afraid, and that's something we should really question and say why that is. But hopefully this campaign is the start of moving that along. And as you've heard, there's many good reasons why we need to build a strong local democracy in Scotland, and you'll hear more of them. But perhaps central to that is the idea of community. I mean, humans, we are social beings. We're designed to connect to each other. In the past, in fact, it was the basis of our survival. If we didn't do it, if you were excluded from the tribe, you would die. But today in digital society, if you want to, you can limit your encounters to human connections to a doorstep encounter with a delivery driver. So we're designed to cooperate, plan, argue, build and create together, but it's also quite uncomfortable to do that. And many people are choosing to avoid it because they can. But I suggest to you, this is a form of self-harm. Dire psychological, social and political consequences. Loneliness is obviously one of them, and I had a meeting with a Conservative MSP actually last week, and he said to them, he thinks much of his casework is to do with loneliness, and that wasn't his own. And more and more we're beginning to understand this disconnection as a cause of mental health crisis. Many of us are depressed, most of us live in constantly high levels of anxiety, and this seems to be particularly prevalent in the TikTok generation. I've got 2 daughters in their 20s, and they and their friends talk a lot about their anxiety. But in terms of our democratic health, we see resignation, disengagement, as well as anger and fear, division, polarisation. These are the most fertile grounds for political extremism and populism. Reform, currently polling 8% in Scotland, enough to get them several seats in the Scottish Parliament. Another behavioural driver from our evolutionary past that is not conducive to modern life is that when I'm anxious, I tend to see things in black and white. Fight or flight, deadly or safe. If most of us are anxious most of the time, we have a society rife for takeover by populists. That's all very worrying, you might say, but what's that got to do with the local council? And the answer is community. Community is a network of human connections, potentially the new tribe. And what better way to build a community than by allowing people to work together to try and make the place they live the best place for them, to let and help them run their own town, village and community. And we know how to do this in ways that heals division, not causes it. For decades now around the world, people have been experimenting with ways to support struggling representative systems through citizens-led deliberation and new institutions such as citizens' assemblies. We've done quite a bit of polling at ERS on community activity, and we think there's a very large untapped resource there. We did a poll in 2021, 4 in 10 people want to give more time, free time to help the council make decisions, and they're, well, 4 in 10, yeah, nearly 40%. Of that 40%, 9 in 10 said they'd be willing to give up 2 or more days per month to help the local council make decisions, and the average number of days respondents were willing to give up to help the local community was 3.5 days. This suggests that there may be more willingness to engage than is often suggested. Of course, people want the council to empty their bins, keep the streets clean and much else without any hassle for them, but they also want to be involved in planning and shaping the future of the place they live. And also be involved when things don't work, which they frequently do, and make them work better. And at the very least, we should have a system that allows them to engage in this. We've got more than enough people willing to lay the foundations of stronger communities, so we can make human connection a central aim of how we form and function local governments. If we turn up connection, we turn down fear and all its consequences for the health of the individuals and for society. This should be a fundamental goal of how we design our local democracy. Thanks.
Really excellent, sorry. Yeah.
Folk, if you want to sit down, seats at the front. I know
Yes.
it's scary. We're not going to bite you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And there's 2 over there as well.
And they're not all in the front row, and there's no audience participation. That isn't entirely voluntary, so please don't be alarmed.
Just move that rucksack, sorry, that's me.
Oh, is it yours, Liz? Absolutely great. Okay, we move on to our next speaker, who is Ewan Aitken. Many of you will know has had a tremendously distinguished career in local government in Scotland, and also as a member of COSLA's Commission for Strengthening Local Democracy. Ewan.
Thanks very much. I've been called many things in my life. Distinguished isn't one of them, so thank you for that. I'm going to take that. That's good.
The moment has come.
It's good. And I'm here, I think, probably largely because I was a member of the Commission for Strengthening, not local government, but local democracy. And that was an important choice of title, and really important. The democracy happens in many guises. But I'm going to tell you a story about election to local government. I stood in 1999 for Edinburgh Council in Lochend and Wrestling, and because it was an election day in Scotland, it was raining, and so this old lady was at the polling station, and I said, "Oh, listen, thanks very much for coming out on a wet day," and she looked at me with a look of kind of disdain and pity, and said, "Son, my mother fought for the right to vote. I wouldn't be anyone else." And that was me rightly told. She had a connection with the political process and the journey that had been taken to change the political process that she would never lose. But many today don't have that. 67% say that they are disconnected from the political process. We've heard just from Willie just now a desire to be, but people aren't sure how or feel it's not for the likes of them. We are, as I've been accused of calling them, an unexpected coalition. I decided that was better than a motley crew. But we're that because there's an important debate going on in Scotland about the Constitution, and that's a good debate. We should keep having it, and so on and so forth, and that's right. And I think it's good that folk from both groups in that debate are here together. But we're here together because we also know that we don't have to wait for that conversation to be over for other things to happen. And that when it is over, if it ever is in whatever form it takes, these things can still happen. Because what we have is more in common than divides us. Because we care about politics, not for its own sake, but for the difference it can make to the lives of our neighbours and the stranger that people will never know, because it matters to all of us. Our ambition is to reconnect people and communities with politics and its processes and its purpose, which is to make life better for all of us. But if that is the case, then the answer is not 32. In fact, if you think the answer to local government is 32, it's a pretty stupid question. This is not about doing better with what we have, it's about changing what we have to do better. Of course, that means involving more people in more ways, using those days that have already been offered, but that offer is not yet being heard. But that means increasing the number of people participating. That's liable to increase the number of politicians. It seems counterintuitive that if there's a problem with politics, the answer is more politicians. But actually, in 1973, we had 400 local councils in Scotland. There were 68 councils in Fife at one time. There were 5,000 local councillors. Compare that today. And my question is, who asked the question in 1973, the journey we've taken in several ways along from there, it would be better if we had fewer? Where was the debate that that was the answer? Where was the discussion that said we can do better with bigger and fewer? I don't think that's happened at all. And I think the consequence of that has been that despite the commitment that we heard from Esther earlier on, devolution has stopped at Holyrood because the direction of travel has always been, let's keep it at the centre. Whereas what we're saying is if you want a better politics and better political decisions, you need more opportunities for more people to be real participants in the decision making that affects them, because that creates more understanding and brings more experience and more diverse experiences to the table, more sources of wisdom to the decisions we're trying to take. Because there's never, I used to say when I'm a politician, you don't make decisions, you make judgment calls based on the information you have at that time. Well, if you widen the breadth of the information, you're liable to make a better judgment call. And there is real evidence that if you put a group of diverse folk in a room and a group of narrow experts and ask them to make a decision about the same subject, you get a better decision from the diverse group than the narrow experts. I'm always struck by the nothing about us without us is for us statement. And I remember back in, when I was on the council, and we got social inclusion partnerships, money from Europe. There's a plan. And there were 6 areas in Edinburgh that weren't big enough to get money, yet the folk in those areas were just as poor as everybody else. So we created what we called the strategic set. We put together 6 small areas and said, whoa, we've got a big area. But instead of creating one big system for those 6, we said each local area can do things itself. So they didn't create a big infrastructure. We just got folk round the table, talked about what we might do, said what are our priorities. We held public meetings and got folks saying we could do this or that, whatever. And we came up with solution after solution. In my area, we got a welfare benefits person to come and go knock on people's doors and ask if they'd had the benefits they wanted. And in the first year, we increased the benefits in our area by £500,000. Somebody working half-time chapping on doors. We created a sexual health clinic a drop-in clinic for young people because we knew that was an issue, but it was hard to talk about. But we found a way of doing it because in our times. And we created a food co-op because folks said getting access to food. All of that done by people around the table with a bit of resource, because that is the other key thing. And there's some numbers on the website about how money is sucked to the centre. And Dave mentioned that there. Because as we know, in my previous life as a parish minister, I knew that all the really important theological decisions were taken in the finance committee. And it's the same with politics. But if you put that finance committee in the hands of people, decide those who are going to make decisions, then you're going to get better ones. And it's not that all things about devolution have been bad. You know, the year before the Scottish Parliament existed, the amount of time spent in Westminster talking about Scotland's health in the year was an hour. We've got that very different now. That's good, but we can do better if we devolve decision making in all the ways that are possible to the people most closely affected by it. Building from the bottom up, I think that concept of reserved powers and then building up, I think. So we could reserve powers to local government and give it to the centre as and when we thought they needed it. And as a model for doing that, then far more people can feel that that young woman who gave me, that old woman who gave me a right telling off, will feel politics matters enough for me to get out and do stuff, and not just on election day. Thank you.
And then finally, a woman who has probably done more than any one single individual to raise the debate in Scotland about our local government and how it differs from most models of local government across Europe, particularly in the Nordic countries. Leslie Riddoch is Director of Nordic Horizons, a former member of the Isle of Egg Trust, and of course a brilliant writer and broadcaster. Leslie.
Thanks, Joyce. And wow, I mean, following you, and God, I've forgotten the twinkly touch that man has when he's speaking. You can just see him in the pulpit giving it loudly. Anyway, thanks everyone for turning up. I think it's funny because for someone who really is hardly numerate, I'm doing the numbers bit here, because actually size matters. And I think many Scots are completely unaware of how totally out of kilter our local government is. We have practically the largest local government units in the world. It's that bad. The average in a Scottish council is 175,000 people. Nobody's registering anything in the room. I know it's early, but you know, no one's going, right? Because FAC ends, right? What the norm is. And the norm is, across the EU, the average is 10,000 people. That's the average. 175,000, 10. If you start to look at what that then produces in terms of utterly ludicrous and unacceptable situations, take Highland Council, since everybody's doing a wee bit of far they come from. My mother's fae Week, Dirty Weaker, actually from Polytown if you want to get precise. She would be part of Highland Council. Highland Council, lordy lordy. It has an area, a third of the landmass of Scotland, 11% of the landmass of Britain. It is larger than Wales, which in itself has 22 councils. It is perhaps more significantly larger than Belgium, which has one federal government, 3 community governments, 3 regional governments, and 581 councils. There are 8 councils in total, Highland is one of them, which has a larger landmass than Luxembourg, which has 12 cantons and 116 councils. Do you get it? I mean, that's how totally out of sync we have become. Behind all of this sits a big is beautiful mentality. And that probably is one of the real killers of our society. Because actually, we all know, you know, a bit of us goes, oh yeah, you know, we've been fed it for so long. It kind of feels right. But conversely, I'll bet that most of you are here because you're connected to something in your community, you know, at the local level. Now let me go to that stage of things. Of course, nature abhors a vacuum. There is something at community level. It's called volunteers, right? Now, I'm not knocking volunteers. I was one with the Isle of Egg Trust. I'm seeing Ian Cook, who is Chief Executive of the Development Trust Association. There's about 350 trusts across Scotland who are all doing heavy lifting in their own communities, and that's great. Many of them have done buyouts. Many of them are running really important facilities. But here's the thing, they're soon going to end up being mini councils because the government's strategy is to let those who feel tough enough pick up extra powers without extra resources and without needing to have elections around all the people in their neck of the woods. And those development trusts, well, they're wondering what's happening too. We have got a weird situation where people who are really interested in their community end up having to put, and there's never less than 10 years in it. You know, every buyout has taken 10 years to get anywhere. You can just wave goodbye to 10 years when you try to take something on, and you will be worn down by it. And at the same time, you'll be trying to operate with a council that might take you 2 days to reach. That'll be your local council, right? Which is essentially hugely bureaucratic. And this is not knocking the people who are councillors. Some of them have wards the size of small countries. A very good friend of mine, Jean Urquhart, who is Vice Convener of Highland Council, has signed our declaration. Her ward used to be the largest in Europe. And she was knackered simply doing the ward rounds. This is crazy, crazy, crazy. So the net result of all of that is that we've got a lot of voluntary effort that is non-statutory. You can do stuff in community councils. The average budget is £400 a year, which is meant to be spent on stationery. You're having a laugh. And that, and that can be completely ignored by the proper councils, as many of you who are community councillors will know. So this is rubbish. It's embarrassing. It's not local democracy. And many parties at election time have picked up aspects of this and talked about rolling powers out of Holyrood. They've never come up with a detail. The details are all there. I'm just going to give you a couple of snapshots because many of you may know. I know the Nordic countries now reasonably well. You might think, James, we're going to end up with loads of highly paid officials everywhere if we have more councils. And I mean, as reports go, it's been mentioned already, there are lots of reports. One from the Fraser of Allender Institute in 2019 suggested having 17 regions and, I'm trying to remember now, 318 councils. Now that's not kind of fringe lefties there, folks, that's Fraser Allender. And the point they were trying to make is that what we've currently got is too small to be truly strategic and too large to be local. We've got the mummy bowl in the Goldilocks scenario here, no offence to mummies, but it's just betwixt and between and it doesn't work. So, how it works in Norway, for example, they have most of the small municipalities that may just have 2,000 to 3,000 people. If they have their education director is usually also a part-time teacher. Now just let that roll around your head for a minute. When you get back to what Ewan was saying about diversity, can you imagine how actually running education might be informed if you were also at the grassroots, you were part of that process? So they have also perhaps 3 functions held by one person. So one person will do roads, planning and transport, and they'll be paid an ordinary wage. In Norway, no one gets paid to be a councillor because the councils are small enough that you can get home at night. So you can have a day job, and that also means they have a much wider range of people being councillors. I remember meeting a lad who was 18 in Stavanger. He was a councillor because he just had to walk along to the council to be part of it. And the important point is that experience of starting your political life, actually with hands-on practical experience in your own place, works its way right up to government, because those are the folk that go on to become MPs in the Norwegian government. They're all practical, they all understand grassroots stuff, they all understand service delivery, because they did it. And by contrast, and I'm not being funny because I'm almost a pensioner now, our councillors are pensioners. I'm not knocking them, but that's not a wide enough range of people to be working. In Norway, because of the way things are stacked, local councils, truly local, they have 1 in 88 people standing for election. In Scotland, we have 1 in 2,071. So we are flaring us off out of the system. And it's got to stop. We're going to have a bit of a contribution at the end from Peter about our next steps on this, but we don't want either a smoke-filled or Perrier-filled room with a couple of experts trying to sort this out. Our solution proposed is to have a citizens' assembly, perhaps several of them, because I see folk have come here from a very long way. It's hard to get everyone ponied into one room, so why wouldn't we have some citizens' assemblies across this large country to start trying to discuss and take evidence of how everyone else manages this better. Thank you.
Brilliant. And if you want even more detail and arguments about this, you can find it in this lovely publication, which is, I think, on every seat in here, and if not, there'll be more copies up the back, which has been produced, which contains essays from, I think, all of our speakers here today. Not essays, I mean, that makes it sound very long and formal, but short but brilliant pieces of argument from all of our panellists here today, containing a lot of these facts and figures, and also further information and arguments. Right, so I think the time has come to take questions from the floor. Do we have a roving mic? Is that you?
Yeah.
Peter's mic. This is Peter McCall, by the way, one of the other leading coordinators of this campaign, former rector of Edinburgh University. Right, anyone like to put a question to any of our panellists, or just in general?
It should be said that the report contains not essays, but Ewan wrote a sermon, and Dave wrote a big time report, and Leslie wrote a column. Any questions?
Lady in the front, and then gentleman 4 rows back.
Thanks very much. I'm here with... use it like a rock star. Okay. I'm here with Scottish Independence Podcast Channel, but for this question I'm more like, you know, the woman on the Argyle Street bus, because all this sounds like a really good set of ideas to me, and it's been great hearing them. But I suppose what keeps coming to my mind is, and maybe we could hear a bit more about it, is you've got small councils that small are going to have to do a lot of cooperating with each other round about. I mean, obviously the ones that are next door to each other, but more broadly, because, yeah, you know, there are bus routes that go through and we need hospitals, and so all of that thing. If we could hear a bit more about how that happens. And kind of aligned with that, if I think about Edinburgh, where I used to live, I mean, so say you've got a local council that's Morningside, and you put Grange into it and a bit of Cotton. A lot of very well-off families, wages. And then you go out to one of the big schemes and you don't get that. If anything, you get a deprived area. So how do you go about just levelling, let's not use levelling up, sharing. How does that work in that kind of more Nordic system? Thanks.
Thanks. Shall we take the other question and then come back to the panel? Because you've been hearing a lot from us. It was the gentleman at the end of the 4th row there. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. From what would like to be the Republic of Leith, which is about 23,000 people, which would be a decent size of a municipality. Personally, I think this is one of the potentially the most exciting things that could happen in the next 10 years, particularly given the other constitutional issues way down the line now. How do we, and you mentioned there, I think, Leslie, about the citizen assemblies to generate interest and input into developing these ideas. I'm quite interested in local government restructuring local services, but many people are not. So how do we get that energy that eventually feeds into political decisions to build a bit of a head of steam on this? Because it could be transformational, but and I'm sure you guys have been thinking about the how on this. It's been interesting to hear. And just finally, if I may, is this doable without the parallel initiative around taxation, raising powers of local municipalities? Thanks.
Yeah, but brilliant questions. I think absolutely terrific, and I'm sure all of our panellists could answer them at great length. Does anybody particularly want to start on any aspect of that? It's about finance, it's about the next steps and how we would use citizens' assemblies to build a campaign and more enthusiasm, and about this crucial question really of if you have quite small councils at the base level, what is the best way of coordinating those activities that require cooperation over a larger area? Do you want to start, Esther?
Maybe take them in reverse order, because you're absolutely right about the financing position. And I think Leslie will maybe be able to say much more about how it's done elsewhere. But the view always was that the Parliament should be making sure that councils had serious powers. And there's a lot of debate, even in an existing structure, about our current financial challenges and how there are actually powers sitting in the Parliament right now that could empower local councils to raise money over land or whatever. But there would definitely have to be a system of, I'm not going to use that word either, equalisation. We can't assume that a tiny little council in a wealthy area gets to keep all its money and a tiny little council in a less wealthy area has to do without. I think we would all agree that that's not the kind of system we'd be looking for. Council financing, just like reorganisation, is a really complex issue, and parties have all put it in the too difficult box. And as Dave made a point earlier, there have been commissions after commissions. I've read so many reports about how you could finance local government, or how local government could finance itself differently. The evidence is there, but we have to engage communities and the politicians. And one of my priorities about the citizens' assemblies is I want them to be run by the Parliament, not by the government of the day, because we don't want this to be a party political issue. We've got an election coming up in 26, and I'd like to see every single party have something in their manifesto about what they would do. And if I come up to another of the small failings of the Parliament, or the disappointment, shall we say, from the convention days, it was about the convention achieved this scheme through hard sweat and consensus building. And we thought we'd have a Parliament that did the same. And we haven't seen that, and it's part of a global trend, but the Scottish Parliament has not been the kind of consensual politics we'd hoped for. And I think health, rephrase that, the health service, and local government are two of the issues where the public would like to see the parties work together to find a solution that satisfies most of them. None of them will get everything, but let's get together and stop using this as a party political football.
Well, sorry, at the moment. Leslie, do you want to come
Yeah,
in next?
just to come in on these points about cooperation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Norway has about 400 councils. We have 32. We have the same population. What they do, well, we had Nordic Horizons had the Minister for Local Government in Norway on, and he explained that the Audit Commission for Norway found that the best delivered projects in Norway are delivered by municipalities cooperating with one another. So, for example, hospitals, I think, have now been taken into central government, but at the time we were speaking, 4 or 5 municipalities, councils, would work together on producing a scheme for a hospital. Now, the importance of that, what he described, was to avoid what he described as monopoly thinking. Now, just think about anything in our world where there's one person practically has made one decision about something really important that's cost millions, even billions of pounds, and there's too small a set of people or person at the centre of that decision making. When they have 4 councils who are all discussing where the local high school would be, you bet there's plenty of challenge right at the start about where the best thing is. There's a point where you have to put a sock in it and actually accept that decision. But what the Audit Commission of Norway, and I would remind you, the Norwegians are judged to be the world's best democracy. What their commission found is that the best decisions were made by groups of councils working together. So cooperation's in with the BRICS. They also have at the back of this a redistribution process, because for sure some of the smallest municipalities up in the Arctic have got not much in the way of income. So there is at the base of it a redistribution system. Other places, just want to mention one more, is the plucky little Faroes. Anyone been to the Faroes? Right, go. It is wild. And it is 22 tunnels. It's 18 little islands between Shetland and Iceland. It's pretty bleak in many respects. The only reason it's one nation is because of all those tunnels. It took me a while, I did a film about it, it's on the website if you want to have a look at it, to realise that part of the reason that there was so much push for tunnels is because of the number of local councils they had making it happen. Now let me tell you, the Faroes has got a population of 55,000 people. Remember, we have an average council of 175,000 people, so they don't even make practically a third of a council here. Do you have any idea how many councils there are on the Faroes? 30. The smallest has 25 people. They have to wait for 3 guys to come back on different fishing boats to have a meeting. And that might begin to sound ridiculous, except the point is they keep political control where they are, and they buy in resources from neighbouring big councils of 1,000 people. The reason all those tunnels are there is because all those councils wanted to have good communications with the best jobs in Tórshavn, and they all pushed for them to happen. So that's the reason that the Faroes is the really truly devolved place that it is today, and it's doing better than us. The population of the Faroes is rising gently. The population of the Western Isles, of Orkney, and even of Shetland are all decreasing. And what the mayor of one of those places said to me, and it really sticks in my mind, is he said the more remote you are, the more power you need locally. And here we have precisely the opposite. So for sure, cooperation, sharing, formal arrangements on the finance, all of that is in with the bricks. You have to presume at the beginning that you're missing something now. Because why would you go through all this hassle, if you're not going to get something out of it? And just to go back to that last example, that chap who's the mayor of Vagar, what they did was they happened to have an Olympic standard swimming champion. He went to some Olympic competition. A commentator said, it's such a shame you haven't got an Olympic-sized pool where you come from. That hit the people of Vagar hard. There's 1,000 of them. They are one council. So they decided, Hell's Teeth, we'll build an Olympic swimming pool. They got the money donated because they were small enough that Aberdeen kent Aberdeen, and basically it felt like you were giving it to your local community. It was built through sweat labour of the fishermen in the time when they came back, so they cut the costs to 1/3 of what a commercial build would have been. The women of Vagar went and did the white lines along the base of the line, something a bit squiggly, but still, it's an Olympic swimming pool, and it transformed Vagar because they then moved further and realised they would lose their kids naturally to higher education, but if they gave them a brilliant experience of adventure as youngsters, they'd come back to have their children again. And Vagar now has a sports high school that takes people from not just Faroes, but Denmark, little Vagar. And the message, the more remote you are, the more power you need.
Great. Any more questions? Yeah, there's two down here. Lady there in the light-coloured jacket, and then the gentleman in front holding the beautiful booklet.
Dangerous to have an actual Norwegian.
Yeah. Hi, I'm an actual Norwegian. I was just wondering, I was raised in Norway. I was there until I was in my late 20s. And there's a couple of things I'm seeing that is really essentially different. There's more levels of government. You have the county council and the counties that are actually elected members, that you're talking about health amongst other things distributed there. And then there's a really, really massive cultural difference that I think is going to be a really interesting way of getting around. There is no, you're not responsible for your constituents. So the whole concept of writing to your council person is unknown because it's party and policy and setting up frameworks. It's not looking out for that one person. We're looking out for everyone. And that is one of the parts that take away the caseload about individuals and tragedies and really pushy people. Those are the outliers, I guess, of casework with your constituencies. Are we ready to do that, to remove that and go over to the European system instead of having the American system that we have now? Or maybe the British came up with it first.
Okay, we'll take this gentleman and then we'll come back to the panel again. Thanks.
Yeah, Donald Staver from West Lothian Joint Forum of Community Councils in West Lothian. And my question is really about the appetite of the political bodies in Scotland to change this. Because we've had community councils for 50 years. We haven't got any powers, and as Liz said, we've got 400 quid. In Bathgate, we're a wee bit bigger, we've got somewhere about 1,600 quid. But nothing has changed in 50 years. Not a single power from councils has been devolved to community councils. Nothing. And there's no appetite amongst local councillors to do that. I'm talking about the majority of them. There's obviously individuals who would support that. At a political level, I don't see anybody in the market for a whole-scale change of government in Scotland. But we know it's essential if we're going to move forward. We recently did, in Bathgate, we did a local place plan, a new document that we're allowed to produce and send to the council. We did that. We managed to get over 1,000 people in a community, 22,000, to fill in the place standard survey. Don't know if you've ever done it. it looks like a survey that's designed to put you on surveys for the rest of your life. However, we've got 1,000 people in there. The lowest score ever, you can mark your community on every aspect of the community. The one area that attracted the lowest score was, do you think you can influence things that happen in your community? Yeah. It was at the bottom, and that's a clear indication to me that this is, this is a very urgent matter. The Joint Forum West Lothian support this. We did have a bit of debate about the first paragraph, but we've decided that the rest of it is more important and that we support it.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, switch that one again. Thank you so much. I don't know who would like to come back on. So, yeah, Willie, I think. Yeah.
I think the political culture is really important. The culture of anything, organisation, politics is vital. And we've got to question whether we've got the right political culture at the moment, and because cultures can be changed as well. And I think one of the reasons that we support this campaign is we see this as one of the potential ways of changing that culture. We're always going to have representative systems, right? When we think about democracy, we think about the representative system. I work for the Electoral Reform Society. We love elections, right? But they're not enough. And particularly the way the culture that's emerged from a first past the post system, even though we don't have that in Scotland, except for at Westminster now, the political culture is dominant. I think that's partly what's gone wrong in the Parliament. Lots of other things, but things have gone right as well. But that idea that it's a binary view and there's one side or another, and you vote and you represent this group against that group. So I think that needs to change. And why? I think why this campaign is so important to us, because I think it's crucial for the upgrading and development of democracy, the next stage of democracy, which is I always try to advise people not to fall into the trap that think elections are democracy. Democracy is about sharing out power, right? And what we heard from the guy in Bathgate and from everyone is that people don't have any power, right? And that has all the effects, the alienation, the division. That has, we're always asking. You're always asking somebody to do it for you. You're always asking for money or asking for power. So I would say that, community. I was on the council in Fife, and it was quite fractious and divisive and conflict-ridden, if I'm honest. And that was just within the Labour Party, as you say. And so, let's not replicate that at community level. Elections might give legitimacy, but actually my experience, and we've ran citizens' assemblies on Brexit and everything, and people hated each other, right? And they never ended up loving each other or even agreeing, but they understood each other. It took time to build relationships within that group, and they understood each other. And sometimes that's all human beings want. They don't need consensus, but they want to understand where they're coming from. And so I think if we, first of all, let's get the size right. Because communities have to, as Leslie says, the problems that come from that thing being too big are fundamental. We need to deal with that. But then let's talk about, and that does impact on the culture. But let's talk about then how we change the culture, and we know how to do it. It's been experimented with. We've got to a point now. We've been doing it for decades, all around the world. We actually know how to do this stuff. It'll be different in different communities, but I just think changing that political culture as a way of, protecting and saving democracy has got to be a priority.
Dave?
Yeah. Picking up on the Norwegian example and accountability, we used to get, when I was working at Unison, regular trips from Norwegian equivalent, which I won't try and pronounce, but it's Forgan something or other, the public service union essentially for workers there, and they would meet our people who obviously worked in very large councils compared to very small ones. And I remember one was an officer in charge of an elderly person's home, and she was asked, she said, well, what about standards and inspection? And she said, oh yes, she says, a man comes from Oslo once a year with a clipboard, and we give him a cup of tea and a biscuit, and he goes home again quite happy. She said, but that's not accountability. Real accountability for me is because we only have one elderly person home and everyone knows me. So when I go to the local supermarket and something's not working quite right, I get told that in the local supermarket. She says, that's accountability, and that's culture change, not just for the councillors, but for officials and everybody else who works in those areas. So, you know, I think it illustrates how small can be more beautiful in those ways.
Yeah, you and
I mean, my concern generally is that we, over generations, have learnt passivity. We've learnt resentment. We've learnt that basically it's them who run stuff, not us. And actually democracy is about them. You can make it whoever them you want. It could be Quangos, it could be a distant council, it can actually be a distant landowner, it can be a distant Holyrood. Everything about power is distant. And that is a hangover from feudalism. If we're going to wake up this country, we need to ditch feudalism in more than just literally those words and an act of parliament. Up here, in here, we need to get that we cannot keep flaring ourselves off out of our own system. So to me, that's what's so important about it. Coming back to that question of how things can operate, Sweden, sorry to mention this in the presence of our Norwegian friend, Sweden, for example, has a system whereby only higher rate taxpayers pay any tax to central government in Sweden at all. Most of you in the room who are average taxpayers would pay your entire income tax to your local council. And then blow me, when they have council elections, they have a 92% turnout. Why do you think that would be? Because they've got your money. And to come back to the question about creating interest, it's astonishing what interest you can create when there's power in the room. And that was also true, whichever side you want to take, of the independence referendum. There was power in the moment. So we've got to shift to a situation where people feel they're not, like the gentleman from Bathgate, essentially being messed around, where you're asked constantly to create plans for something that a larger authority will just disregard. That is teaching you something. And we're teaching the next generation the same bad lesson, which is don't engage because it will break your blooming heart. Right? We can't go on like this. So.
Yeah, there was another element to the question here too about the, are we ready for the change in the role of councillors themselves that this kind of reform would bring? And I think Esther's got some thoughts there.
I have to first do my true confession and say, like William a Pfeiffer. And I always look back to the 70s and the Wheatley Commission. Sorry, thanks, Leslie. Nothing like Kirkcaldy versus Dunfermline, whether it's on the football pitch or anywhere, until John Wheatley suggested dividing Fife and putting the north in Tayside and the south in Lothian, and suddenly Fife discovered what it was like to be united. To come back to the question about accountability, absolutely. If you come back to that, I mentioned at the beginning about the Parliament and decentralisation, and Dave made the point about strategic decision making. If you told me when I was touring the country doing those presentations that I'd have MSPs debating whether the council should be allowed to have a tourist tax, and whether if they did it should be a percentage or a flat rate, and should it be the same in Edinburgh as it is in Inverness, that was not what we elected our MSPs to do. That's the job of our council. I saw an article at the weekend about the caseload of MSPs, and they're absolutely flat out, most of them, there's a couple in the room I think, working really hard. I understand that 60 to 70% of their caseload is actually about housing and health and all the things that have got nothing to do with the Parliament but are to do with local government and, God save us, the Quango state, which we'd have another argument about. So there is that whole thing about we would change the culture if the Parliament stuck to the things we need it to be doing and let the councils get on with the things that we want them to be doing. One of the things that's not been mentioned, and I don't know what would happen because it would be a cultural shift, but in the old days, especially in the likes of the Highlands and the Borders, councillors were independent. They weren't party political at all. I think latterly lots of them stood as independents and you knew which party they were anyway, but hey-ho, I think the kind of councils the Nordic countries have, people get involved because, as Dave says, they can see they can make a difference and they know they have to work hard because when they go out at the weekend they'll get their ear chewed if they don't. So I think there is that whole debate about the role of parties and whether councillors would be independent or not. I think coming back to your question about will the political parties shift, I think the difficulty you've got is as soon as you create a parliament and you get the kind of culture we've got, they don't want to give powers up. Back to Leslie's point, the whole point of this campaign is for the public to start demanding that they do, and that's what we have to do, not be sitting quietly waiting for them to take action. Nobody's referenced another Fife institution called the Carnegie Trust, based in Dunfermline. They're doing a survey UK-wide, social, economic, environmental and democratic well-being, and it won't surprise you to know that democratic well-being scores the lowest, and they can take it across age groups and geography and all the rest. We won't get that democratic well-being until we get power in local hands and people feel they're in control of their own lives through their own local council.
That's great. Thank you very much, Esther. Right, we'll just take a couple more questions and then we'll think about winding up, because I'm sure people have a busy week ahead. Yeah, lady here. Is there anyone else? Yeah, gentleman at the back. Okay, we'll take the lady here first. Thank you. It's Anne. Hello, Anne.
Fascinating presentations, thank you. I'm remembering that, of course, it was Edinburgh Council which had to be forced to have the elections for community councils back in the day, led by David Guest and helped by one or two of us like me. On the question of transparency and local accountability would mean that we wouldn't see the dreadful figures that have come from Transparency International about the PPE stuff. But my question is perhaps for David and Leslie. You referred to quangos. How do we better mandate quangos, better to work locally, better to spend locally, better to be effective locally? Which begs the question to Leslie, if I may. Do they have the same problems with quangos in Norway, and are they as numerate? And do people often say they're going to have a bonfire of them, but not quite achieve it?
Thank you very much, Anne. That's a really interesting question. And gentleman right at the back corner there. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mike from the Local Democracy Working Group of the Radical Independence Campaign. We very much welcome this launch, and I'd echo the words of Dave Watson that this is a start, a beginning to a process.
Hold the microphone a bit closer.
Yes, we welcome this campaign as a start. Is that better? And thank Leslie in particular for keeping what probably many of us represent groups that have been involved in this dialogue. What I wanted to ask was what's the next process and stage of a campaign, and how are we going to practice the participatory role, particularly for those of us representing organisations here, in deciding on how this campaign moves forward, because it does need to be a grassroots campaign that has local residents. And the second thing is how we're going to debate some of the controversies around this. Citizens' assemblies are a good solution in many respects, but how we get to that process. We've already had the question of finance raised, which I think is right. It's right that we're focusing on structure and size, but the other question that will be raised will be function. And in particular, the biggest quango in Scotland is NHS Scotland. It's the NHS, and that was never envisaged as a nationalised organisation. If you go back to Labour's plan for the NHS in 1942, it envisaged it very much as run by local government, and it was only the revolt by the hospital consultants that meant that it became gradually and increasingly a nationalised industry. And we know from the experience in many other countries that healthcare dealt at the local level is a much more important part. Clearly you need centralised facilities, but you also need local healthcare and local democracy in that. And how do we see having those debates, which may well be very controversial within the movement and debate?
Yeah, well, that's really almost three really terrific questions. That's really almost three really terrific questions there. And the first one, a vital one about quangos and the whole role of quangos in our society, administration, democracy. And then the first part of your question, very vital to the next kind of 10 minutes of this event, which is what are the next steps and how is a grassroots movement towards this to be built. And then finally, the particular points you made about the NHS and that kind of question about function and at which level it should sit. So all terrific questions. Dave, do you want to make a start?
Yeah, certainly on the Quangos, I wrote something not so long ago covering that, and the reason that I did so was that a politician I won't name talked about a bonfire of the Quangos, and I'm old enough, sadly, to remember it was probably about the fifth politician who had said something similar. And we looked at this also in the Christie Commission as well when we're doing that, and the solution, I think, to localising the work of Quangos is complex, and it varies service to service. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I mean, in some cases, if you can't devolve, I mean, in some cases you can just devolve them. Bear in mind, issues like career service, for example, used to be a local council function delivered locally, then got shunted up into a national Quango. So in some cases you can essentially divide them down there. That doesn't mean there wouldn't be some sharing of strategic services within those areas, so that you might well have the local services delivered by the local council, but you might have some specialist services which may be run on a regional or national level. In other cases, the NHS is particularly complex. People forget about it is a Quango essentially, and health boards are Quangos as well. And there is a difference, I think, as Norway and other countries have found, between local community health services, which can be run locally. By that I mean the GP service, the district nurses, the midwife services and so on. All of those are essentially run locally anyway, other than having a great bureaucracy above them, but actually autonomous, self-autonomous, self-directed teams actually can run those services locally without a great problem. What you can't do is, in fairness, is run a big acute service, a general hospital from a small council, and other countries in Europe have done. So there's a mixture of pictures there. Even when you can't devolve them, maybe a quite small Quango, what you can do in those circumstances is give them a legal duty to cooperate locally. I don't mean set up a faux committee and go and visit once a year and listen politely and do nothing about it. I'm talking about a legal duty to have that engagement. And in other cases, you can have direct elections as well, or joint boards, which we already have the legislation to do, where, essentially a number of councils run those. So it's not a straightforward solution, and I accept that not every Quango could be dismantled and turned locally, but there are a range of options in there. We touched upon it in the Christie Commission. There have been other people, including me, have written about this, but it's important we do so. £26 billion are spent by unelected Quangos. That's a huge sum of money, a lot of which could be devolved to local level.
Just taking that a bit further, if you start from the premise that we're building from the bottom up rather than top down, you then create Quangos, if that's what you call things operating regionally, on the basis that they're accountable to the local authority. Because the problem with a lot of Quangos at the moment is that the lines of accountability to ministers are frankly weak, and the minister doesn't have or won't impose the theoretical accountability they've got. Whereas if said Quango, whether it's running a local college or even a hospital that meets the needs of a group of councils, are accountable to the council, you've got a different type of conversation. So the starting point for why a Quango would be created would be different, and the lines of accountability would be different as a consequence. And just going back to the point that was made earlier, I should say one of the reasons I grabbed the microphone was just to make the point I'm the third fifer on the fourth. So actually the kingdom is coming. Before we get into too much detail, in terms of taking this forward, if we start out with saying we want this many or that many, we're in danger of losing the out before we started. We need to remind people about the vision of this, which is about a country where people and communities matter and influence change and lead their communities. So we need to create that vision, and we've attempted to do it a bit here, and we need more help doing that. Because out of that then will come the answer, what is it you need to do, how many of these and how many of that you need to achieve that vision. If we get into an argument about, is it this many or that many, then you're not going to get to where we need to get to, and we'll stop before we start. And so let's think big before we talk small to get to the small.
Yeah, get the big vision. Leslie?
Yeah, this problem of following you in every time. This is something John Swinney said in his speech to the SNP conference about 10 days ago in this city. He said, "I have complete faith in the people of Scotland to take the right decisions about their future. If we give them the tools, they can build whatever country they want." These are the tools we're talking about now. Because we can't build anything by remote control. And that is essentially what we're talking about today. And that is, I know that's not what he intended, but I hear this now differently. I want those tools for us. And those tools are not supposed to be locked away in a cupboard, put on the top shelf, that only a Quango can actually reach. And on this point about Quangos, one example, because sometimes this can all feel a little bit sort of arid, but I mean, one example that I was very connected with was the HPMAs, the Highly Protected Marine Area proposals from Marine Scotland. Now, this involved a consultation which basically was saying to islanders, because I got a lot of response from islanders here and other coastal communities, it was basically saying, we're going to stop you from being able to fish, and stop you from being able to swim, and stop you from actually being able to do anything in areas we cannot yet tell you, we cannot yet specify. We won't give you any compensation if you are a fisherman. What do you think about that? Now, you know, we ended up, that was a pointless, I mean, many people even think Marine Scotland deliberately created such a dafty way of doing this consultation because they didn't want the, if you like, the environmentalists involved in what was previously an industry very much run by the fishing community. I don't know. But the point is, nobody with their head screwed on would have done that kind of consultation with people if they'd been involved in any kind of community business. Perhaps better to say, to pick up Ewan's point, is that, I mean, really good government, to my mind, is a balance of power. It's not sitting with one, it's sitting with, for example, we should have had Barra Council being able to feed into that. Lewis Council, that's probably too big. You know, all these councils would come to Marine Scotland and go, hang on a minute, matey, don't think we want that. And they would have power, and they would have skin in the game because they had power. As things are at the moment, when you get something ludicrous like that, which also contributed to the breakdown of the Butte House Agreement, which changed Scottish politics at the big, important, oh my God, Holyrood level, that very much got driven by a really crap consultation. And this is the final point I want to make in response to what you were asking on, is that every time you're talking about Quangos being made to be more accountable locally and, you know, consult people more, where's the power in that? The power stays here. Every time we have a conversation about better consultation, no. Better participation even, no. Because what that is I keep the power, you can just be the dancing monkeys if you think you can jump high enough. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about shifting the power out so the Quangos have to consult you. You're in the frame because you live there, because that's how local democracies work. And final point, because I don't think it got picked up from yourself actually about Morningside Council and stuff. Of course, Peter's about to give us the gen on the citizens' assemblies. They might look at all sorts of systems. However, across most countries, and certainly the Nordics, all the main capital cities of the Nordics are one council. They're like, that's not where the difference is. Now you can have long conversations about how you improve democracy within one city council, but they're mostly the same. So there isn't a Morningside Council in Oslo. What we're talking about then is the total absence of democracy across the rest of Scotland. And although people in the Central Belt may think everyone lives in Edinburgh and Glasgow, We didn't, right? Just the majority of people are living in towns and they have nothing at the centre of them. Or islands where they're, you know, Barra is literally a 2-day trip to get to your local HQ in Stornoway. So that's the kind of change we're looking for. And yes, we need to get this up the agenda. It's going to be tough. That's why we've got a posse. Join us.
Sorry, Leslie, can I just ask, are you saying that, you know, if Oslo is just one, Stockholm one council, that Edinburgh would still be one council or Glasgow?
I'm very wary of being prescriptive because our aim is to let people think it through. I'm only telling you how other places work. And the difference is not at the city stage. The difference is everything beneath that.
Okay, a last word from Esther and from Willie, and then we'll come to Peter for the winding up and the next steps.
We know that when we come to this conversation with the public, the Republic of Leith will be the bit that will cause us the biggest challenge. Firstly, I'll not have to be worrying about that thing. If I go back to the convention scheme and to Campbell Christie, Campbell used to say, Ian Lang did us a favour when he abolished regional councils, because the argument against the Parliament was, oh, it's another layer of government. He went on to say, but once we've got our Parliament, we'll have to recreate it. And in those days, Campbell's belief, and I quite liked it, was we'd have 3 councils at regional level, and they'd do water and police and fire and health and all sorts of stuff. Now, of course, the world's moved on since '96, and that's not how it works. People forget the reason we have the quangos, many of them, was because of the democratic deficit of not having a Parliament. And this scheme was very clear that the Parliament's job would be to review those quangos. Now, quangos has become a bit of a derogatory term, and I have to hold my hand up and say I've chaired 2 or 3 of them, and I'll tell you, as chair of a health board, you are accountable to ministers. They might not like it, but my view is primary care and public health belong in local government. My first public health director said to me, pre-75, I'd have been on the council because that's where 90% of the leavers sit. So like other countries, I don't think it's beyond the wit of us to say, let's stop building all these structures to design participation between social care and health care. Let's put community health, public health, primary care in councils and allow them to work from the bottom up, as Ewan says. So that's one way to deal with that quangle. But I do think, you start from the bottom up, you would be reviewing the purpose. And when I was chief exec many years ago of Quango, you had a quinquennial review. Every 5 years, what is the purpose? Should it still exist? Or could somebody else do it? And nobody's asked that question of any of our 160 Quangos in 25 years. What I would say in defence is, people complain about these limited number of people that sit on Quango boards. You know why? Because most folk wouldn't apply to do it because it can be a totally thankless task with little power there either. So I think it's time to review that whole system in the round as part of the debate about new local councils. I'll finish by saying, I hope we've fired you all up. Peter will tell you what's coming next, but if you do nothing else, sign the declaration and get your neighbours, your pals, your family to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just briefly to lead into what Peter's going to say here, because you and Leslie covered a bit about what the process is, and I think it's, again, to escape from my binary thinking, I think we do need to allow a process that not have a set plan, right? Because there's a process that has to arrive at that. But at the same time acknowledge the gravity of the status quo, and this is why the Nordic examples are so important, because it's quite hard to imagine something different from what you've already got. So I think starting with the principles of what we want for our communities, which is empowerment and ability to run their own place, and then, as you said, let's work out how we kind of deliver that, and it'll be different communities. I think, thinking back to the 90s and the Big Bang, I think this must be a process over a period of time, rather than one big event. But again, without being binary on it, there needs to be structures in place to allow that to happen. So I think we're going to hand over to Peter to say what that process is.
Yeah, Peter.
Thank you. Just one thing do we want you to do? Sign. Yeah, sign. Go and sign the declaration. So that's the most important thing. But I think we've had a number of points, and I think the point from West Lothian is a really well made one, that over a period of time, we've had lots of initiatives, a brilliant Cosler report, lots of other things that have tried to change the situation. And I think each one of them has foundered, partly because it wasn't at the right time, partly because what they were proposing was too specific and didn't have enough buy-in. And I've sat on a platform as a candidate in an election and said, I think there should be more local democracy, and had people say to me, absolutely not, because you're not going to get elected and you just want a way in through the back door. What we need is a campaign across society to get people to demand this, because if we don't do that, then we're not going to get the change that we want. And the pathway to that change is we want parties to put in their manifesto for the 2026 election, a commitment to a citizens' assembly to be run by the Parliament, to come up with firm proposals for what we would do, how we would do it. I think, as Willie says, it's going to be a process, not an event. And what we need is that to get the real buy-in from people. We need you to go out and be champions for this, to talk about the need for more local democracy, to talk about the need for people to control their own lives in a way that they just don't at the moment. We can work out the details later. We've got a really clear process by which to do that now, and I think that's what we will be asking you to go away and do. So thank you for coming today. We have loads and loads of these reports, so if you want to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to convince people, then please do. There's a great variety of writing in there. It's not all one-dimensional. So please do take those away. Please do sign the declaration. Please do talk to people, and let's make the case for a local Scotland and build a local Scotland. So thank you.
Just to point out that the place to sign the declaration, if you haven't already, is the website, which is buildlocal.scot. Buildlocal.scot. The other thing to say is, astonishingly, 3 of us will be on Scotland Tonight, on STV tonight, so you can always watch us there. I'm also quite mindful of the question Mike asked, actually, which is how do we as a group go on from here? Because some of you might want to get more involved, and to be really honest with you, we hadn't thought about that. I don't know why, but a lot of you are here. I wonder, I mean, this might all get too complicated. Are there people who want to be more involved in organising this? Yeah, great. Exactly. So could those people just come up at the end and we will basically manacle you to us and never let you go? Well, that's quite useful, because I mean, it's just to say that, well, this sort of kicked off when Esther and I met last year, and it just bemoaned the 25 years of lack of local democracy. We've basically placed people on, as you can see, in terms of the conventional political debate. We are varied. And that's been a careful business. I mean, there's been no punch-ups, no anything, actually. So we've just had a quite kind of gathering, and it's taken a wee while for us to gather as a wee posse. So, but now I think we do have to see how we would widen this out, and many hands make light work, as my mother used to say. So if you would like to come up at the end and just volunteer yourself, we can capture that and then go away and think about how we can meet again. So thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. As Kenyon Wright was fond of saying during the Constitutional Convention, that power isn't a thing that is a zero-sum game. It's a thing like love. The more you share it, the more you give it away, the more you devolve it, the more you have in the end. You have a more empowered society that can really control its own fate. And my goodness, do we need that now? So thank you for being here. Please do sign up and volunteer to do whatever you can. Thank you.